Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement and lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.
Emerson, welcome to Lawyers Who Learn. I'm really excited to dive deep into our conversation today because you have a really experienced background that I think a lot of attorneys and aspiring attorneys, those in law school, will learn from.
Well, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And just to share, we have a connection. We both graduated from New York Law School. You graduated, I think, in 1999. Is that correct?
Yep.
I graduated in 2006. Okay. And you're still very active at the school. What are you doing with the school today?
I've been on the board of trustees. Oh my God, I'm getting old. Probably about 8 or 9 years now.
Awesome. And what I like to do is sort of in some of these conversations, like in movies where they go to the present and then they go to the past and go to the present. So maybe we'll do that.
Okay.
And generally, the conversations turn into a theme of like an area or topic that like ends up being the main thing. And I'm not even sure what the theme will be for you. And I'm going to ask you a question about that. And that is there a topic that you would love to talk about? And the answer could be no, because I'm putting you on the spot, that you're never really asked about when it comes to your career or how you've learned, or just from going from law school to you've had so many great experiences that we're going through, but is there something that's a little bit off the beaten path that you always wish you could talk more about?
I'd probably career transition and sort of like, I don't know if it's necessarily like knowing when it's time to leave, but like sort of like setting goals for yourself at every organization. I have a mentor. Whenever I start a new job, with my very first day, he calls and says, "What's the next job?" Right, and so it's sort of like this mindset of knowing what you're setting out, what you want to get accomplished at that whatever shop you're at. I think I know from experience, like long gone are the days where an employee. Not too many folks are going for the gold watch anymore. Like, haven't had too many jobs in my legal career, but I've started out at the firm. I was there for 8 years and worked as General Counsel at the shop for close to 13 years. And so sort of like long tenure, but I know that's like for most of my friends, that's very rare. They've had, more jobs than I have. Not to like necessarily bounce around like every 2 years, but at the same time, give some thought to, really mapping out like what your career looks like. And I think it's particularly with the young folks young attorneys that I speak to, and also, folks who are of my vintage. I think, there's a lack of people like focusing really on what that is and what you're setting out to accomplish for your career, because nobody else is going to come and do it for you. So you really have to have that like sort of top of mind. And that really gets discussed. I mean, it does, dinner parties or whatnot, if it's having cocktails at dinner, or one-on-ones with mentees. But I think that's a great conversation to have as well.
I love that. And one of the things that came to mind, and it's less maybe applies to attorneys, but it probably applies to everybody, is do you know the Netflix model? When they originally started, their whole thing was helping people celebrate the growth at Netflix and determining if there's any room to grow for them at Netflix, or helping them move on to the next part of their career. And sometimes and they actually help people like in those conversations. And something that we took on with Lawline, that we try to have open conversations, especially with those I coach. What's next for you? It could be 10 years, it could be a year, but like, tell me a little bit about where you want to go. How can I help you get there? And so I love the transition conversation. So appreciate you bringing.
Yeah.
Are those conversations, just out of curiosity, are those conversations you've had in your career where
I have and I'm sure we'll get into like, so I've, also been a CHRO in addition to General Counsel. And so those are definitely conversations that I have. But, oftentimes you'll find employees coming in, which I always find, I shouldn't say amusing, but someone's like, "Oh, I'm very unhappy." I'm like, okay, well, if you're that unhappy, like you're not thinking about leaving, you're not thinking about like moving on. To your point, like, is this the right place for you? What are your goals or what are your aspirations? So I've certainly had those conversations, both on the GC side of the house, but also as a CHRO.
All right. So if I could, I'm just going to read through your resume really quick.
Okay.
So you worked at Proskauer Rose, right? I guess out of law school for about 7 years, I think, if that's correct.
Just over close to 8.
Okay. Close to 8 years. Then you became the GC EVP at TMP Worldwide.
Hmm.
I think for 13 years. I didn't
Yes.
write that down, but that's flashing in my head. Then you became the Chief People Officer at I think it's called BSE Global, which is the parent company of the Nets.
Mm-hmm.
You're still the Chief People Officer there, is that correct or no?
No, I'm now General Counsel for Jazz at Lincoln Center.
Right.
I had a 2 year stint with the Nets and BSC Global, where I was their Chief People Officer. Yeah.
I saw the Lincoln Center, but for some reason I don't have it in front of me. I didn't see an end date there, so I wasn't sure if you were doing them both at the same time.
Oh
So
no, I wish. Listen, maybe
that
I
would
could
be
double agent and clone myself, but
and so those are all really big, exciting, impressive opportunities that you've had. And I think kind of going through the transitions of each one maybe could be a really interesting conversation. But I want to start with the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a question that all of us lawyers who decided to go to law school had to answer is what drove you to New York Law School originally?
Right. Well, so my tagline is I went to law school to be the Black Jerry Maguire. I played basketball for 1 year at Michigan. Took 2 years off and was a financial analyst for a small auto insurance company in Atlanta. I was a math major in undergrad. And then I hated that. I was incredibly bored. And a lot of my friends went directly into law school and said, "Oh man, you love this." I remember one friend who was like, "Oh man, I'm working for this big law firm. I'm making more money than I could spend." And naturally that sparked my interest. And then, so I had a bunch of guys. The team that I played on was a really good team. And a bunch of my friends were in the NBA, and they were like, "Oh, don't be an
You
agent."
played in Michigan, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
And they were like, "It's a really sleazy business. You shouldn't do it." But I'm stubborn. I didn't listen. And so I worked for an agent my first year of law school. But that's the reason why I went to law school. I went to law school to be a sports agent. That was my original goal.
And did you grow up in New York?
No, I was born and raised in Detroit.
In Detroit. Okay, maybe you said that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it makes sense with Michigan. That's a nice shift there. Just out of curiosity, you mentioned 1 year. Were you injured? Like what happened with basketball?
No, so I went to Michigan to originally as a civil engineering / architecture major. Didn't like it, so after 1 year I pivoted and focused on actuarial math, believe it or not. And so that extra year I was there on the 5 year plan, and I tried out to be a walk on my fourth year, the year of the Michigan infamous timeout with Chris Webber, but didn't. Well, I was selected for the team, but they never called me back. And then the next year, I just banged on the door with all the assistant coaches, and I joined the team the year after Chris Webber left. So it was like the Fab Four after Chris Webber left, and that was an amazing year. Really good guys, and just to play basketball every day with guys of that caliber was really really cool.
So you joined. It was the last year at Michigan. You were saying when you did that extra year.
Yeah, so it was my fifth year at Michigan, my last year on campus, and yeah, it was odd, to do that in my last year, but yeah.
That's bittersweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is that common, by the way, to have to walk?
Well, I mean, usually you can walk on to any team like whenever. I think the team and the coaches already knew me because they sort of passed me over the year before. And so I was sort of a known commodity, but most people, if you're going to walk on, typically you try to walk on your freshman or sophomore year. But my course wouldn't allow me to sort of focus on that. My fifth year was a little bit easier. I was had one foot out the door, and yeah.
So fifth year, obviously, it's a long shot 1 year in to go somewhere with that. But I'm sure there's always that little back of your head, you can do that. And then so you graduate. And then how long did you work before you went to law school?
I was a financial analyst for 2 years for this small auto insurance company. And as I said, absolutely hated it and knew that I wanted to do something different, and took the LSAT and studied for that on my lunch breaks and after work, and landed in New York Law School. I applied to New York Law School, Brooklyn Law School, and some school out west, but got in New York Law School. And my first visit there, they were having some alumni function, and I met this old guy who just told me that he was like, just go, what's your gut and what do you feel? He's like, I had a great experience here, but go where you feel comfortable. And I definitely a decision, one of the better decisions in my life was going to New York Law School.
And full disclosure, my dad also went to New York Law School, and he graduated in 1972, and I think you guys know each other as well. Yep. And it changed his life because he barely could make it in. He barely could afford it. He was driving a taxi when he was doing it. They gave him a scholarship, and he kind of went through that. And that's why, like, his entire life, ever since he graduated and became a personal injury attorney, all he ever wanted me to do was go to law school. And of course, wow. Then it was the last thing I wanted to do.
Of course, right.
But I feel so grateful that after 5 years of working, I was in sales for 5 years, that I was trying to figure out what the rest of my career would look like.
Right.
That I had that opportunity. So yeah, definitely love New York Law School. Love the building that was built after I left.
Yeah, tuition dollars built. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's tuition's a whole nother conversation. And so, okay. So was another question that I like to ask is, was law school the type of learning that you expected? You know, did it help prepare you for what you were hoping for? Or did you feel like, you know, a lot of people were coming straight out of college, and so I don't know, the same mindset as those who were in there?
Yeah, I would say, my classmates were a little bit younger than me, and some older. I think, spans the gamut, but for the most part, I think folks were a little bit younger than me. I don't know necessarily what I expected, I think, I had a visit, sat in on some classes, and I did this like summer program before I started. And that sort of like got me off on the right foot. But I loved it. Like I loved like I was a nerd, sat in front of the class. Like I really wanted to engage with professors and have like what I like tried to silo in or like force blinder into like a one-on-one conversation, like blocking everybody else out. But I really, really enjoyed it. And I was fortunate to have some really great professors who I had like personal relationships with, like even after I graduated. And so it was a great experience for me. And I knew, having worked and like for like my background in math, that I wanted to do like, corporate law, corporate finance. And so like a lot of people, you don't really know what they wanted to do in law school. Now, mind you, I've been practicing for more years than I care to admit right now, but I still don't really want to know what I want to be when I grow up. But then I knew I wanted to get into corporate law.
It's interesting because that is a rare commodity, being good at math and being a lawyer. And because one of the things, Lawline, we have a lot of web developers at Lawline. And we've interviewed somebody who's both a web developer and also a lawyer. And there's a lot of interesting similarities between problem solving as a developer. And I assume in math, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was curious. So I was just, how is that, just kind of step into your whole career for a second? How has those two skill sets helped separate you or helped you in learning and growing, and all the
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as like problem solving. Like even when I would take law school exams, like I just attacked it like, if some professor gave you like an example of what a practice or real test that they gave an A to, like I would like break it out into like segments. Like if, the fact pattern, I could fill in the blanks, but it's like I know what the answer is, and I'm sort of just like pulling from the fact pattern to fill in the blanks on the names, but I know like what the answer is. And just the way you attack and analyze problems, like that part of the law, like the whole IRAC, like the way I think and break things down, like it works for me. And I say, and I think the key to math, which I tell my sons and like kids that I mentor on the math side, like the key, and you read it in like a Malcolm Gladwell books, the key to math is the ability not to give up. Like how many times are you going to pick yourself up after you fail? And I think the same is true like in law. Like I have a mentee now from New York Law School who's externing for me, really bright young lady. But writing is a skill that you hone, and like you have to, practice it and fail in some ways, and have somebody be, a terrorist with the pen and really like say, no, red ink here, like, let's word that differently. And so I think for me, like that, putting those pieces of the puzzle of like problem solving and the way you tack and think about something, like, oh, okay, I could write it this way, but I can also write it this way. Or yeah, okay, well, this person is arguing this, but what if we come and do that? There's another way to sort of like angle it or think about it. And so for me, particularly with like negotiation or even like drafting an agreement, yeah, it's for me. It's and the way my mind works, it's not a far cry from like how I solve problems.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
there's the logic component of it, and then
yeah,
certainly then there's the no. I don't know. My dad was really, he's a great negotiator, and a lot of that is, like poker, like bluffing, high noon,
yeah,
like in just certain things, and that's it. It's tough to have those. It's tough from my perspective to have the math skills, the actual being able to execute skills, and then the negotiation skills. Where do you fall in that area in terms of being able to? And again, you're not necessarily in litigation, so maybe that's not
right.
as
No, why?
necessary.
I mean,
But
at Proskauer, I did private equity M&A, so negotiating and
that's
dealing
the
with the people who run the portfolio companies. So that I'm very much a people person. And so, when people find out that I also do HR, I think my CEO at the time, who sort of gave me a Hobson's choice, I was sort of voluntold to oversee HR. Um, but I think she recognized, to her great credit, because it was a great pivot for me in my career, that I was a people person. I could handle the HR side because HR is, most lawyers, we just bang a gavel and say yes or no, black and white, because it's the law. But
yeah.
HR, you've got people's lives in your hands, and spider bites, new babies, like it's a whole nother like
Say
ball
spider
game.
bites.
Oh my God! I mean, I need to write a book after I retire and change the names of the innocent and the guilty. It's like so many things that have happened on the HR side. I mean, and there's so much overlap between the law and HR that
Oh my god.
every general counsel has a ton of HR stories of funny things, horribles, you name it.
I mean, look, spiders are scary. You don't want to be bitten by one. I hear that. I mean, every so often, that's where Spider-Man, got his powers. All right, so let's talk about your first transition, sticking with
Mm-hmm.
it, which I really liked. Obviously, this is a transition everybody needs to make, but your first transition was out of law school
Uh-huh.
to Proskauer Rose, which is, depending on what you want, like an AmLaw 100 firm is the coveted job that everybody
Right.
wants. Tell me about your mindset there, and what was the game plan? Was it thought out? Was it like you just give us a sense into the window of your career planning at that stage?
Well, so I figured out during law school that Black Jerry Maguire was not like wasn't my testimony, and so I actually got a gig at Case Scholer, which I think is now merged out of existence, um, and got an offer at Case Scholer like the summer after my first year. I got the City Bar Fellowship, and so then I had a friend and she had that same scholarship and she went to Proskauer, and I said, "What'd you do this summer?" And she said, "Oh, I met Patrick Ewing." "You met Patrick Ewing?" I'm like, "Oh my God, what did you do?" And so I looked up Proskauer. The Rose in Proskauer Rose actually is a New York Law School alum. But at the time, they weren't recruiting at New York Law School. Wrote them a letter and interviewed. And so I thought to myself, well, if I can't be a sports agent, Proskauer was the biggest, sports entertainment firm. And they expanded the game as far as what they did, focus on labor, with a whole host of like titans in the sports labor space. And then they had an incredible corporate law team as far as finance for stadiums and representing teams and acquisitions, you name it. And so I thought, okay, well, I know I want to do corporate. Let me pivot and try to go to Proskauer. Interview. Was lucky enough to summer there. My second summer, got an offer, and then started my career there. But my focus and reason for choosing Proskauer was because of their sports practice.
And did you focus on that at all when you were there?
No, when I got there, it was the corporate group was a bit small, but I met a partner who really took me under his wing, and he and I hit it off. And he did private equity M&A. I dabbled and did some sports work, and the first like matter I worked on was on Woody Johnson brought the Jets, and so I worked on sports matters, but it wasn't as sexy as everybody like makes it out to be when you hear about it or read about it in the Wall Street Journal. It's just I try to tell law students that all the time. The key word in entertainment law is law, right? Like it's you're going to be working on matters, but it's an agreement, right? Like it could be for a stadium, it could be for a sponsorship deal, but it's just an agreement, and so this partner who I worked with, his focus was on private equity. He had a great client, Charterhouse, and so I was just doing private equity deals, and he threw me into the fire like really early in my career. So I was like closing deals in like my third year as an associate, and Yeah, he was great and just like taught me how to be a lawyer. Like, we'll talk about working remotely. Like I literally sat at his feet and learned how to be a lawyer and like shadowed him and gave me a ton of responsibility, probably too much like early on. But it was a great experience.
Well, certainly there's another path, right? That if you
Mm-hmm.
stayed at Proskauer and then became partner, you partners do very well there, I'm sure, as
They
they do
do.
at law firms and financially and responsibility and deals wise. So take us through, 7 years in, where's this transition conversation? What,
Yeah.
what, what's happening here?
So I got engaged, wanted to start a family, was getting married, and it's funny. So the partner who I was talking about, who was like my rabbi, my mentor, like I told him, he never lets me forget this whenever we talk. I told him when I resigned, like I don't want to be you when I'm, 55 or whatever. He's just like it hit him like a ton of bricks. But I meant because he made a lot of sacrifices with his kids. And so for me, I was raised like by my mom, and I knew I wanted to tuck my kids in every night. And so just looking forward, I knew that, hey, yes, I'll make a ton of money if I'm a partner here at Proskauer. I'd like to think that I would have become a partner at Proskauer had I stayed, but I wanted a better quality of life because I was working my tail off. Was about to get married, and I knew I wanted to have kids relatively soon. And yeah, so I wanted to pivot. And then I was had just begun was soon ending my 7th year, leaving the firm one night, and a partner who was also in private equity, but he and I hadn't really worked together a lot, told me about a company that his client had acquired and said they were looking for a GC. Didn't know if I was interested, and told me to stop by his office if I was interested. And I was like, then at this time, you're up, like this was a time when you could sort of like at least the story was you could make partner in like your 8th year. This was like 1990. This was 2007. And so I'm like, it's like a setup. Like, is this the way that they sort of figure out a way to like pick me out, take me out of this
Wow.
selection pool? But I was like, I knew I wanted to leave anyway. So I went by, had the interview. My first interview, the CFO offered me the job before I left the room. My first interview, the CEO, excuse me. And so I tell people all the time, like, I'm incredibly lucky. One, that the firm sort of like teed me up for my first GC gig. And two, like the CEO and I hit it off incredibly well, like from the very beginning.
This is at TMP Worldwide.
Yeah.
So,
Now known as Radancy. Yeah.
okay, but it's a huge agency representing sports and actors, right? Or just
Well, no,
actors?
there are recruitment advertising agencies. They have a ton of
Oh,
huge clients across the board, every probably big brand you can think of, but they do recruitment advertising. So they help companies attract and retain talent. And so, you can imagine like during the pandemic, they knocked the cover off the ball because everybody was trying to get people back to work. But yeah, it's an advertising agency, but with a particular spin, like career pages for like big brands like Avis or ESPN or Verizon. If you go to their career page and see like, hey, do you want to work at McDonald's or Avis or whatever? Like, Radency does that type of work.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah,
So, and out of curiosity, I mean, first of all, I got chills when you said that you wanted to tuck your kids in at night
yeah,
because I can relate to that. I have three
yep,
kids, 16, 16, and 11. And the building a career with the personal freedom to be able to be with my family. We
yep.
even moved to Barcelona for 2 years
Mm-hmm.
right before the pandemic, and we were there during the pandemic. Is been my number one vote because time
Yeah,
is limited. You always can make more money. You can't have more time,
yep,
especially with
exactly.
kids before they're 18. Um, with that said, I'm sure. So, out of curiosity, when you told the firm, were they like shocked? Were they supportive? A little bit of both. They're like, "Oh, you were 6 months away."
No, well, I think for them, I mean, it was the best of both worlds because I became a client, right? And so we had that relationship, and I was there for 13 years. So I think it
Fantastic.
was a win-win, not a win-win. I mean, naturally, it's funny. I just was with the firm. They had a alumni dinner at a restaurant I have in Moore last week, and so I'm still very much engaged with the firm. Still come back and speak to the African American associates on a regular basis, and still engaged with the firm.
At
Um,
Proskauer.
yes, at Proskauer.
Awesome. Awesome.
Um, but yeah, no, I think,
How
I
many
think the partner that I worked for was, he was incredibly shocked, but other than that, I think it was a win-win.
Just out of curiosity, you said speak to African American associates. What is the percentage, or how many total do they have? I don't know if
I
they.
think across the board, every firm, be it the number of associates and the number of partners, could certainly use improving. I'm not sure the exact numbers. I will say there are far more, African American partners at Proskauer now than when I was there. When I
Yeah.
joined, there were only two, one in corporate, one in labor, and I think two friends of mine rose up through the ranks. One made senior counsel, the other one made partner, and some other senior counsel. But now, like I personally know, five or six, and so you would think over the last like 20 years, maybe the numbers could be more, but like
Yeah.
some of them are, heading like the LA office, head the Chicago office. Like these guys aren't like, just rank and file, like pencil pusher partners. They're like, corner office, guys who have a big book.
There's a an organization. I'm forgetting the name of it now. Tell me this is completely wrong. I want to call it like 10,000. It's for African American or Black general
100
counsels.
black men,
What is it called?
100 black men in New
I
York.
said I said 10,000. So I was a couple zeros off.
1,000 million man march. You somewhere. You pegged in between. You're right in
Yeah,
between.
I'm getting. So, were you ever a part of that?
No. It's funny. I was with a bunch of guys the other day. I live in New Rochelle and having dinner with a bunch of guys, and one of the guys was, I think it was either the founder or a member of 100 Black Men. No, I'm not a member of that
Okay.
organization. Yeah.
Okay. Just curious about it a little bit
Yeah.
more. So back to TMP Worldwide. How large was the company when you became GC?
Well, one of the reasons that they brought me on, they once owned Monster.com, the first job board, and they owned the Yellow
Oh,
Pages.
I know exactly who they are. Yes.
Yeah, and so of course the Yellow Pages has sort of gone the way of the dinosaur, and Monster has sort of like faded. Well, I think Monster may still be around, but they wanted to acquire because they had just spun off from Monster, which was public at the time. So I did a ton of acquisitions. So when I started, they were relatively small. I think I acquired across the globe probably about 10 or 11 companies from Canada to Singapore, Germany to France, you name it.
And where did they, just out of curiosity, to get that money to acquire? Was that from internal growth, or did they raise money to do
No,
that?
they were owned by a private equity company, and their whole strategy was to grow and to build and hopefully pass along, which they did right after the pandemic to another group, and yeah.
Two questions. One, did you get to tuck your kid? Did you get to tuck your kids in bed at night working there?
I certainly did, and it was great. I mean, listen, I worked hard, probably, you know, well, I think working hard. I don't want to like scare off any like young attorneys or law school students. I mean, you're going to work hard as a lawyer, particularly if you're going to be a general counsel or have a position. But just know that my only client was sort of like my CEO and my board.
Yeah.
But when you are working for a law firm, like, as you know, like you have a whole slew of clients, all of which can call you at any hour of the day, particularly given that the world is so much smaller now with technology. And so the demand on my time certainly wasn't what it would have been had I been a partner at Proskauer. And so
For sure.
it
For
was
sure.
great. So yeah, I tucked my kids in every night. It's funny, my
As much as
ex-wife
possible.
turned 50 in December, and I gave her all these videos because she's compiling this thing for my son who's turning 16 in June.
Oh,
And so I've got all these videos of me coming home, and the boys. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old son. Um, and so now it's like my oldest son is 6 feet tall, so it's like it's like a long way away. But to your point, it goes so quickly. Like he's a sophomore in high school. I've only got 2 more years with him under my roof, but man, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I wouldn't trade that time for the world.
You talked about your son being 6 feet tall. My son's taller than me as well, close to probably 6 feet as well, and he can run faster than me. He's better looking than me. He's stronger, and I'm like, wow, at 16, I was really this far along, and it's so great to see, your kids
Yeah,
grow.
yeah,
and sure, and it's interesting. My son's 16, but he's a junior because of just how dates worked out when we lived in Barcelona. So we're starting the college search process. He's a twin with a sister who's 16. So that's
yeah.
the world. But my second question to you was, what did you say in that interview that you pretty much got hired on the spot?
Well, I think you know much like we talked about problem solving and doing like deep dives, like if you give me like a bit of information, like I am so over prepared for like every interview that I've ever had. And so, and this was like, the internet was around, but this is 2007. But I just scoured like their website, and I'll never forget. Like she was so impressed that I talked about this project, this creative project that they had done that I thought was cool because like I'm, my left brain, right brain, like I'm very creative, and I'm very like analytical. And this is funny because this creative is still, he and I are still very cool. Now, if you go to my LinkedIn page and you see like this colorful thing with the brain on my LinkedIn page, a buddy of mine, Russell, did that. And I was talking about one of his projects. She's like, oh my God, how did you know about that? I was like, oh, it's on your website. But she could tell that I had done all this work in trying to learn the company. And I had so many questions about, how they wanted to grow and what her strategy was about growing. Yeah, so you see that colorful thing where on the
So
right side is all this
take us through
color.
this.
Yeah. And
What
then
is
on the left side, there are all these like little charts. And this is exactly what my brain is. Like I love music, I love art, collect whenever I can. But on the right side, like if you want to talk about problem solving or how we, you want to send me a deck and you want me to run through the numbers like that, this is exactly like what my brain looks like. This picture
wow? I
resonates.
love
And
this.
I have this blown up. It's like 5 feet by 3 feet in my home at my home
Oh,
office.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
But my buddy Russell
Good for
Miyake, he
you.
he drew this
Oh,
for a client years ago.
that is so cool. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. Wow. I wanted look. You mentioned it. I figured let's take a look. Wow. Yeah. By the way, 100%. I mean, it's so easy, especially nowadays, to come in over prepared to every single interview and to
Yep.
offer some as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's manages people. You want people to come with solutions and ideas,
Yes.
and not just questions. And
Right.
so, like, I appreciated that. And so,
Mhm.
okay, so 13 years. You said I don't know, 10 acquisitions, a lot of acquisitions. There's so many. We can go. We only have about at most an hour, so we can't go on these different branches that I would love to at a different time because I'm sure you've learned so much. But because we're sticking with the theme of
Yeah.
transition, okay, what was the when did you start thinking about transition? And tell us the story there.
Right. And so, and as I talked about earlier, like, at the beginning of the conversation, like knowing when it's time to say goodbye. And I was really sick and tired of being a lawyer. And I was telling anybody who would listen, in, my little pity parties and bitch and moan fest that, hey, like, man, dude, I'm burnt out. I had been there for 13 years. I had done everything I had set out to do. I had seen them through, um, buyout. And it was becoming like I could triage anything that came across my desk relatively quickly, and it became like Groundhog Day. And the CEO, Michelle Abbey, and I are still very close. We're like an old married couple, and like, not that I wanted to get divorced. I was like, oh my god, it's time to like try something new. And a buddy of mine who I actually went to Michigan with, who's also a lawyer, or he was a lawyer at the time. Now he just does government affairs. Um, a buddy of his, they were working for Madison Square Garden, and this buddy was hired away and was chosen as the CEO of the Brooklyn Nets and BSE Global. And as I said, so my second year into my stint at TMP/Radancy, my CEO, came in and like sort of volunteered me that I was going to take over HR. So now I've got a decade plus of being a CHRO and general counsel, and so we talked about like a career path for someone, like never like turn away somebody trying to give you more work. Hopefully you're getting more money for it. But if you're not, I still take the opportunity because now your breadth and exposure to the organization, now you're in, there's no way you can't be in every single conversation, every single meeting, right? Like, oh, we don't need a lawyer here. But now the chance that I run two big departments, oh, they're back in and they're not revenue generating, they're not profit centers, but nevertheless, I have a real say in the organization, right? And so I've got the CHRO experience, and the then CEO of the Nets, like we hit it off, and he was like, hey man, you can never have too many lawyers in the room. I've learned that from my experience. And same thing, had an interview, over prepared. Now we're talking basketball, HR. I'm parachuting in the midst of a pandemic and I've dealt with so many things from HR issues around the globe that, there's not too much I haven't seen. And not on wood, because anybody who's in HR will tell you there's always something new and terrible that's going to come around the corner. But he and I hit it off just in like our approach. He was like, MIT, Stanford business guy, just like hit the way that he, attacked problems, and personality. He and I like were really, really close and alike and like-minded. And so, yeah, so I was like, let me take this leap of faith and like, hang up my lawyer hat, which I did for 2 years. And then, but again, a fantastic experience. Like I wouldn't change it, for the world. Although, I will admit that it was challenging. And then at the end, I'm like, oh my God, like I really miss being a lawyer. Like, I realized like being in HR without no legal experience. And the general counsel was still a friend of mine. I had speak at New York Law School last year. A great, probably the best attorney that I've ever met with or worked with. Um, he his office was right next door, so I would still like I could like listen in and hear all the legal problems, and he and I would discuss them. So it wasn't like I totally turned off the faucet with respect to like the law, but I didn't have my hands in the pot per se.
You had mentioned something that I wasn't sure if you said it with the CEO of TMP Worldwide. Did you have a conversation with her like that you were burnt out and you needed to move on from law, or that was something you were talking with a colleague about? Because
No,
that's a hard thing to actually, because sometimes I want anybody who's going to want to leave at Lawline to tell me they want to leave. And I'm like, great,
right.
let's have a conversation. I'll help you figure that out. I know that's hard. A lot of people don't do that because it's depending on the situation.
No, I didn't have that conversation with her. And again, we had been through like a lot together, so we like were really close, and so she might have known that I was like, burnt out. I'm not really sure. Yeah, it's funny. We've never like talked about that, but I remember vividly. Like, so every time that I like move on, I remember the conversation clearly, and she does as well. We had like our weekly, Zoom call for the executive leadership team, which is all over the country and the world. And at the end of it, I said, "Hey, Michelle, can I catch you for 2 seconds?" And then everybody dropped off, and she was like, "Oh my God, no!" Like she said, like the minute she said, "You never do that." And she was like, everybody dropped off. I'm there, and she said, "Oh my God, no!" And I was just like, "Yeah." And she was like, and we were literally like on the verge of tears, like saying like I was gonna leave. So, like and I'm like, "Oh, you're fine, yeah."
Well, it's interesting because one, I know that. Do you have a minute
Yeah.
conversation? and kind of what you said, it happened so quickly. It's not like you were planning that for years and years, or maybe
Right.
you were, I don't know. But because it was happening so quickly, it didn't necessarily make sense to like, oh, we just had like it wasn't didn't serve your purpose and serve sort of that. Okay, so just out of curiosity, how many, when you're head of HR for the parent company of the Nets, how many people is that?
It's funny. So the Nets is a really huge brand, but a small company. So I work for a not for profit now, which probably has like somewhere between 120 and 150 like full time employees, and it's about the same for the Nets at the time. Now, I will say, if you go to Barclays Center, which Joe and Claire Sy own as well, the people who oversaw HR for the Barclays Center like reported to me, but we farmed out all of the work there, the unions that we worked with at the Barclays Center, and so naturally that's another like 1,500 to 2,000 employees depending on the day that you're there. But technically it was only like 150 employees that work for the Brooklyn Nets.
But when you say work for it, is this like the coaches, the staff, like, or not?
Yeah, I oversaw payroll for NBA players. It will blow
And the
your mind
players
what they
too.
make on a on a bi-weekly basis. But yeah.
And any interesting stories that are public or that could be like that are not like private, that like just
Oh
being
well, I
HR
mean,
for
listen, I think it's all public now. But this was the midst of the pandemic, so um, you know, we had to tell our employees that they had to get vaccinated. You can imagine that doesn't go over well, and that comes with a whole host of issues from an HR perspective and legal ones as well. And then Kyrie Irving was on my team, and he made some decisions that one might question, particularly given the fact that a bulk of my executive leadership team and some of my ownership group were Jewish, and so some very
I
difficult
don't follow
conversations.
basketball, so I don't even know what happened, to be honest.
Well, I mean,
He
and
said,
this is all public, but Kyrie Irving posted a link to a documentary that was very that could easily be viewed as being anti-Semitic,
got it.
and then sort of like didn't apologize, and didn't, I don't know if it's like a throw a stone, hide your hand type of scenario, but and then eventually it got resolved. But needless to say, there were people who were very upset about it, fans included. And you can imagine what that would do for a workforce, particularly those, who were Jewish and not Jewish. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
very challenging.
and certainly, obviously, I'm Jewish. It's certainly very timely now. It's a very polarizing topic, but
Yeah.
not one for this podcast today, but certainly something I can connect with and as a society as a whole. But maybe in a different.
As I tell law school students all the time, I'm like, but those are the things that you really get paid to do, like the crunching the numbers, or reviewing an agreement, or going through performance review. That is not the real job as a lawyer or as an HR professional. It's the stuff that's really sticky, that's
Yes.
really hard, where you have to have a difficult conversation, where you really need radical candor. Like that is how you really like make your bones. And so yeah, like the times that we're in right now, to your point, are just as hairy and sticky and hair pulling, and but I think it's stuff we got to deal with.
Yeah. Well, so Radical Candor, we read that book. It's really and Crucial Conversations. We read that. We have a whole. We're only 35 people, but we have a whole emerging leaders program. We have a whole focus on coaching and top grading and all the important things that I feel like I can run a 1,000-person company with the structure that we have internally, but there's nothing about the trust building of having radical and crucial conversations. But you gotta do it all the time. You can't just do it.
Yeah.
You got to do small conversations and not just the big ones, but certainly, those are the toughest ones to have in HR. So I guess to your point, there's a lot of there's a lot of things that still drain you outside in HR, including the spider bites. And so you're working with the GC of the Nets. You're like, well, wow, like I love what he doing. I think he's doing. And so, all right, take us through your next thought process of when you wanted to start the transition and going from there.
Did my stint at the Nets, realized I wanted to be a lawyer again. I actually took a year-long sabbatical, which was actually the best year of my life thus far. I'm divorced, so I have my sons week on, week off. And so during this year, it's actually 13 months, when I didn't have my sons with me, I was traveling. And it could be a short trip, it could be a day trip, it could be me going to the Manhattan. But I just got out and I just needed a break. And like the pandemic really like wore me out. And so, again, best year of my life. Came back, recognized and realized that I wanted to still be a lawyer. I sort of chased the dream, continued to chase the dream of like my passion. Like it started off like with basketball and sports, continued that with the Nets, and now, working for Jazz and Lincoln Center. Wynton Marsalis is our fearless leader. Love jazz, have a real connection with that through my family, and so I'm doing things that I love. My buddies who are partners at Proskauer are making a ton more money than me, but I'm happy. I'm no longer tucking my kids in at night. Now I'm yelling at them to go to bed because it's getting late. That transition was one in which, let me see if I can, make a difference, follow my passion, and still like add value to an organization.
Got it. And again, the goal of the podcast is not to dive deeper than we need to dive, but like you mentioned, a really important, like to me, a good interview or conversation feels like therapy. But you mentioned really some important things there: divorce, transition. You took 13 months off. More travel, that's a huge life change. I don't know if that happened around the same time with the divorce. That's a huge life shift happening in such a short area. Travel to me is one of my biggest pleasures as well, especially with the kids and letting them see the world. What did you use that in addition to travel, did you find that you needed to do? What did you have to learn about yourself? Or like, was it like, some meditation or coaching or things like that? How did you handle the stressful times? Because as you know, being a lawyer is one of the most highest stress professions.
Mhm.
Alcohol, suicide.
Yep.
That's why the CLE, there's in many states, it's a mandatory requirement to take courses in those areas. How did you handle stress during that time and in general?
Right. Well, particularly that the year I took off for my sabbatical, it was a lot of like self-help. So I'd already started like meditating. I started meditating
We did.
with a my family and I go to Martha's Vineyard every summer. So there's this guy who's like on the beach and during the month of August named Christopher. So I started meditating there. I really like spiritual. The first time I meditated, like I'm sitting there, I'm not meditating, I'm doing yoga, excuse me. I'm doing yoga on the beach and like I'm like just broke out in tears. I was like so stressed from like work and like not knowing. That was like the first sign that I needed to like move on from my gig. And it was like, okay, to your point about the stress and how it affects you and your body, I took that year, man, and I worked out, meditated, CrossFit, and like every day, like it was me, right? And so between meditation, yoga, and CrossFit, like got in great shape and just like just focused on like relaxing and just sort of like taking it in. And like people say like particularly when they think about retirement, like not wanting to retire ever, and they'll be bored. Like no, that year off taught me that God, I want to retire that sooner, right? Like it was like I can't wait. I got to the money's got to line up.
Oh
God
my
willing, if
God.
the market's not down when it's time. But
College will make you think differently.
I
Uh,
know, right? Yeah, good Lord. Um, so
wow.
yeah,
Um, well, first of all, thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable because every single person listening to this is stressed about something, especially as an attorney, especially during their career transitions or not being happy where they're at. And
right.
so what is your thought there about the many people who are not happy where they're at? And I don't know what the circumstances if you just quit or there was a mutual conversation and then you left without a job lined up and obviously you had this ability to do that. But what about the person who's really not happy in their career right now? They don't know what to do next. They're really stressed. Like how what have you learned that can help them get unstuck where they don't
Yeah.
look back in 10 years and they're still at that same job?
And so for me, I think it's funny. My father like always talks about like my jobs, and I tell kids this all the time. Like I don't think I've ever had a job that I really liked. Like I would just be to be abundantly clear. Like
Wait, you said that? Who said
I
that?
say that. That's my
Okay.
tagline.
Okay.
And I said it to my father. He heard me telling a kid that one time. He was like, "Oh, join the club." He was like, like that's no big deal. Like you think I liked every job I've ever had? Like that's no like no badge of honor. And so I think a lot of people don't really like love their jobs. Like, I've like I've heard your dad like talk, like there's some people who really love what they do, right? And like and for them, like the litigators, the labor guys, or people corporate guy, like if you some people like really love what they do, that's not my testimony. So I would say for most people, I think you got to find your joy elsewhere in your life. And it could be your kids, it could be like something outside of what you do. But then I think because I'm a firm, going back to radical candor, I'm a firm believer and radical candor. And so if you can't like sort of have that um, sort of open honesty, compassion, like where you work, where you're free to like be you and not be rude or have brutal honesty, but feel comfortable at work to the best extent that you can, then I think you got to find it outside the 9 to 5, right? And so it's a combination because I think people say, oh well, the minute I leave the office, I turn it off. I think that's impossible because I'm always like working. If I'm on the Metro North going home, coming back, thinking about something, somebody calls me out of the blue. But for me, I think you sort of have to find out what else is there in your life that can bring you peace. And so, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. Like there's so many things that I do outside of work. Like, and even the way that, I'm so like, so I haven't been diagnosed, but I'm sure I have ADHD. Like even when I'm at work, like, if I have a break, if I give myself breaks, like I'm doing the things that I love for that 15 to 20 minutes. So if I'm at lunch, I'm making a phone call on something that brings me peace. And so I think you sort of just have to line it up And so I had this great yoga teacher. It's like, you got a lot of balls in the air, and then sometimes they may not all both be able to juggle five at one time. Sometimes you can only juggle one, right? Like, but try to find like what your balance is, and like going and try to find that peace. I think it's a combination of your physical, your mental, and your spiritual. Like if you can get all of those things like aligned, and then of course goes into like work and family. We're dealing with kids and parents now getting older. Like there's a lot. Like life is stressful. So for me, like I've got to like balance it out and give myself time for me. Because if I think you got to, put your seatbelt on to put your mask on and your seatbelt on like first, and then like help someone else. Because if you don't have you together, my grandmother used to tell me this all the time. So I'm very much like my father, like try to do so much for other people. She's like, you got to take care of you first, because if you fall, then so much else falls apart. And that's true for a lot of lawyers and their families. Like we're usually like the centers of like financial like stability, and you have all these things that you're worried about and stressed about. Like you got to take care of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Uh, my mind's racing about everything you're saying. But is your dad still alive?
My dad is still alive. I mean, he's the last of eight, and he's got more ailments than I can count, but he's still
Well,
kicking, just not high.
well, I mean, there's no doubt that when he looks at you, there's pride for sure, but you definitely share this interview with him. I think you get a lot of. I think you would really enjoy
Yeah, I
hearing
think
all
he
that you're
would. He
saying.
certainly would. He'll be crying. He's a
You're
crier. I
dropping
can't lie.
nuggets. You're dropping nuggets left and right. It's funny because you mentioned. Well, first of all, I agree with you. Like, even though I love my job, I still hate parts of it, right? But I do also find things that are making me that I get value outside of work. As an example, next week I'm facilitating a 2-day workshop for YPO in Barcelona. They're flying me there, they're putting me up in a hotel, but they're not paying me $1. And I'm leaving my family. I'm going out there. Yes, it's Barcelona, but I'm doing it because of what it fills my heart. It's my energy. It gives me
Right.
my passion. And I just need to teach and need to share. So I totally recognize that. And when you mentioned my dad, that guy actually did love what he did.
Oh yeah. No, he does. Like there's a
Which
couple
is
guys on the
crazy.
board.
I didn't, and when you grow up in that household, because my dad, you mentioned Jerry Maguire a lot. He was that, the mentor that they always point to in
Right.
Jerry Maguire is like, you need to continue and do. I don't know if you've heard
Yeah.
my dad speak at
Yes.
all. Like
Yeah.
that's him.
Yes. Yeah.
And what he said, and which is so fascinating, he was a personal injury attorney. I don't know. Most personal injury attorneys, you don't hear them loving what they did. What was his mission, his why? He found that he got money from rich insurance companies and gave it to his clients who were mostly poor.
Right.
And that's what was his mission and his vision. And I'm like, wow, that was a great way to do it. In the last minute or two, if that's okay, if the time's still there. Again, like I said, I could talk to you all day, every day, and we'll continue to do this. And hopefully we can continue this even offline. Any books that have helped you professionally or personally, whether self-development or business books or fiction, but just that have helped you in sort of taking a step back and pausing and in your career or your life?
Well, we've already mentioned anybody who manages people, I think Radical Candor by Kim Scott is a must. You mentioned the book. What's the other book that you mentioned? You said something
It's similar. It's
conversation.
called Crucial Conversations.
Crucial Conversations. Okay, I got to get that one. But yeah, no, I give Radical Candor to everybody who I work with, and who work for me. And so, because ultimately, when I speak my mind and and I'm coming from the heart, I want you to know and understand, like from, what it's based in. And so I highly recommend Radical Candor. I'm a big fan of, you do a podcast. Do you know Tim Ferriss?
Well, I remember the 4 Hour Work Week.
Yeah, so he's done a bunch of other books. He's got another one coming out now, but he's got 4 Hour Work Week. That was his first, but 4 Hour Chef, um, like the 4 Hour Cook, 4 Hour Chef,
Or a body or something.
Tribe of Mentors. Like every one of his books after 4 Hour, I got 4 Hour Work Week too, but all of his books and his podcast are just excellent. Like just that whole attacking, like he's like a human guinea pig as far as like getting the most out of yourself and your body. And then like the Tribe of Mentors is just like, conversations about It's not like 48 laws of power, but it's like, hey, like what's worked for you, what hasn't? Like life lessons, managing, investing, whatever it may be. And I just like it. I'm a people person. I just like hearing other people's like stories and like how they did what they did. And it could be titans of industry, it could be poets, it could be chefs, like it could be power lifters. Like I don't, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like I love like that mindset of like go. But I am notorious of in my house I have this books everywhere that I haven't read. Like I'll see them and I'm like, oh, okay, and I have them there, and like it's like for a show. But those are the ones that I do really read. I made a commitment to read, and people who read are gonna laugh at this, but to read 5 books this year because I don't read books a lot. I do a lot of audio books.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the Tim Ferriss recommendation because I really got so much value, and I know he's amazing and everything he does, but I somehow stopped following him and reading his other books since then. I think I tried 4 Hour Body. I'm like, this isn't for me, but
Yeah,
I will recircle to that. And I know
yeah.
he's done everything and anything. To some degree, I almost feel like not worthy. I'm like, this guy makes me feel like inadequate when
You're
everything.
not doing enough. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will reflect on that. And then there's something you just said that oh man, you were saying books, podcasts. Um,
The different
what,
types of people involved.
man, I had a great way to close this, and I interrupted my own thought, but that's okay. Well, yeah, I'll close on this question because it's similar to the question that I started with.
Okay.
Now that I asked you originally what was a topic that you generally don't talk about and you want to talk about, now is there a question that you were hoping on this topic that I would ask you, or something, or thing that you wish we had said, or that you want to leave people with that we didn't speak about, that it's not, you don't have to go too far back and dig deep. It's like it's always been on the tip of your mind and you want to share it.
I have this theory again that our fathers have come up in a lot in this conversation is constant elevation, and it's basically when I start out my career, like you may not know like what you want to do, but just take a positive step like forward, and be excellent at what you do. Like I'm talking now because I have this extern from New York Law School is about all these things about what it takes to like really be a great lawyer, and I keep stressing to her that it's not you being a great lawyer is like table stakes. It's that those soft skills and your ability to like sort of relate to people and have those honest conversations that's really going to set you apart as a lawyer. And so for me, this whole concept of like constant elevation, like I really want to make a commitment to be a great lawyer. Like I want everybody that who works with me to think, oh my God, like let's go ask Emerson like what we should do, like without hesitation. Because usually if you're a law school student looking at this, when you get into corporate America, people view, the legal department as the speed bump, right? It's like the pediment to business. And so that's not where you want to be. I want people to view me as their business partner. And so this whole for me, this theory of constant elevation, I didn't think you would ask the question, but for me, like it's just constant striving. And I think it goes back to a lot of the things we talked about over the courses, from our kids to working out to peace to meditation, what have you. It's like, just constantly improve and constantly like, stay steady in what you're trying to do.
Well, I think based on what you just said, Lawyers Who Learn was the perfect first podcast for you to get started, because you are a lifelong learner in every sense of the word. I just thought of something on the spot. Let's see if it works out.
Okay.
I want to give you control of my next interview. Who would you recommend that you think is an amazing learner, who can be, it doesn't have to be, they don't have to be practicing law, but they were a lawyer at some point or went to law school, who I should interview for a future podcast episode?
That's a great question. Two people. Kelly Walker, who's currently the General Counsel for John Deere, and Andres Carberry, who is he's now the CHRO for Phillips 66 or Phillips Conoco, but he is a former lawyer and they're both friends. But just like incredible, like people, like, and as far as like lawyers and professional corporate, like professionals, just warriors. I think they would be great.
So Kelly Walker and Andrew Phillips?
And Andrez, Andrez, Carberry.
Carberry. Okay, Carberry. So would you be okay? This is on the air, but would you be okay if I emailed you after, next day or two, and then you can just reply to that and introduce us and get that going? And I really appreciate you on the spot. I just thought of it because like there's only so many people that I know, but I would love to see where this experiment can go. If every person is like, who is the person you think should be next, and see where we end up. So that would be fun. Awesome. Well, Emerson, I really appreciate your time. I've learned so much from this. I truly have. I feel like a different person, and that's the hope. So, and I want to, we're in the same circles. So we'll find a time to meet in person as well. Where are you right now? Where do you live?
My offices are right near Central Park, Columbus Circle. Near Time LL, former Time LL building, now Deutsche Bank. Yeah.
Oh, it's not the Time Warner. Oh, right. That makes sense.
I know it's been,
I still call it that too. Yeah.
I know everybody does.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And looking forward to
this. Was great, David. Thank you so much. It was an easy conversation. I appreciate you.
For sure. I appreciate you, man.
All right.
Yep.
Bye.